So thank you for the great intro. I don't feel like I need to say much about myself except for Hatstaratu Sidstat Jamie Donatuto, and I'm speaking to you from the homelands of the Swinomish Indian tribal community today, where as Chandler mentioned, I've had the honor to be able to work for the last almost 24 years. And I'm excited today to talk to you about resilience. But before we even get started, again, I just want to reiterate, I'm hoping that this is an interactive 50 minutes for everyone, and I have a poll to start you all off with. And the poll to you all is just a question about your experience working with Indigenous communities. It's a multiple choice answer, so it's not a difficult test or anything. But could we launch that one? Awesome. Fun, I get to answer it too. Uh, so please answer that and we'll be able to show the results quickly. The reason why I'm starting off in that way is because we all come from a variety of backgrounds and knowledges, and there are many different knowledges. And I think that it's a good idea just to have an idea of where we're all coming from so that we're able to build better bridges to understanding. And that helps me to know who I'm speaking to as well. So thank you for answering the poll. Do we get to see some results? Are we close?
Yeah.
Ooh, exciting. Okay. Very cool. Okay, so a vast majority of you have worked or do work on one or more projects with Indigenous communities, so you do have at least a basic understanding, which is awesome. So thank you for that. Uh, we have one more poll that I'm going to ask you to do quickly, and this one is about how you define resilience. And do you think that the definition of resilience can change based on a person's worldview or their knowledge?
All right, we've got everyone has answered.
Great. So clearly I'm not being a great social scientist because I'm giving you very leading questions to which you're answering. They're biased questions, clearly. Yes, okay, great. Thank you for that. That's great because that's really the basis of what I wanted to talk a bit about today. And I'm glad that most of you are already on board with this idea. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and I'm also excited to see lots of folks that I already know who also have lots of experience in this realm. So a quick story, and then I'm gonna ask you to engage a little bit more with a Jamboard. Or now wait, we're calling it a Zoom board, right? Figure it out. So probably a couple of years ago, the Swinomish tribe wanted to do a hazard mitigation plan for FEMA and NOAA and others. I'm guessing no, wait, everybody knows what these are. Yes. Yeah, I'm guessing everyone does. Evan, I know you really do. We've worked a lot on this. Cassandra, you too. Okay, thumbs up. Everyone's giving me thumbs up. Thanks. So we ran into a huge roadblock, which was that in that case, in that context, resilience was defined essentially as infrastructure. So how resilient was your infrastructure to natural hazards? And this was a huge issue for the tribe because infrastructure was one of the small pieces of what we were thinking about. Really, we were thinking more about all the other aspects that make Swinomish Swinomish. So the ability to continue with intergenerational knowledge transfer, education, being out on the land, connection to land, the community itself, and many other aspects, all of which Swinomish considers to be resilient, but didn't fit anywhere in what we were thinking about doing. And so clearly a lot of us have figured this out, and with all of our different knowledge sources and are working to slowly change the gears of how things are done in other levels of government. But I think that it's a good reminder that even though we know these things, it's also our job to pull along or to help or to cajole the others that don't yet understand this. So I'm gonna ask to pull up an online sticky note board, and I would love for you all to type in what your definition of resilience is. And also, well, can we get that board up? Awesome, thank you. So your definition of resilience, please, whatever that might be. And what's fun about these is y'all get to see what everybody else says too. I think. This is really fun to watch. It's almost like meditation. Um, it's also so very quiet. Does anybody have any good background music?
I don't know how to create a new sticky, so I'm just stealing one.
Please do. You can create a new sticky with the bar on the left, but there's also some open ones on the board that you can just throw things into.
Is there a way to put like a sticker or a thumbs up on one that you agree with if you didn't write it?
Yes. Let's see. How can you do that? So with the tool on the left, you can add shapes and stuff. And so maybe the easiest way would just be to like use the pin tool and give a check mark or a star.
I love what people are writing. I feel like I was curious to see what you would all say. I hope you're all curious about what others are saying too. But ultimately, the social scientist in me is like, oh, we need to capture this. This is really cool.
Don't worry, Jamie, it's being recorded.
Thanks, Amelia. Oh, look at the star. All right, I'll give you maybe another minute. I see lots of names and sticky notes moving around still. So while we finish up, I just wanted to give a bit of background on some of the work that we're doing at Swinomish that builds on what I was mentioning earlier in terms of how Swinomish defines resilience and actually how we're doing climate adaptation implementation based on the definitions of resilience at Swinomish. And then I'd really like to open it up to discussion, just because I have a feeling that a lot of you also have some really good ideas, inputs, and projects that you're working on. And I think it would be great to have a discussion about that. So many of you probably know about one of Swinomish's projects, which is our clam garden project. They're also called sea gardens or marine gardens. And this is one of our main climate adaptation projects. A couple of you maybe have even visited our clam garden. It's open to visitors, so if you would like to come, you're always welcome to do so. Pick a negative low tide. But essentially what a clam garden is a really low-lying rock wall that you can only see below mean low tide, so a -1 or even more, that creates a terrace behind the wall built up of natural sediments and cobble and sands, and essentially extends the habitat for clams and other bivalves that are really important first foods for the tribe. And what's so amazing about these simple rock walls, there's so many amazing things about them. First of all, some of them have been carbon dated back to over 3,500 years old in BC, and they're still active working sea gardens in BC now. The one that the tribe built is the first modern day clam garden in the US. We built it in 2022, August 2022. And not only is it a representation of Indigenous knowledge that is still incredibly applicable to this day, what's amazing to me is that, you know, from a Western science perspective, things need to be proven. And so there have been studies showing that both the biodiversity and the population numbers are larger on clam gardens than in very similar areas that don't have clam gardens. There's also demonstrations that the clam garden walls have moved over the years as sea levels rise and fall within the Coast Salish area. And we also have a couple of newer theories, which is that when you have a whole bunch of shellfish hash, so the ground up shells from the shellfish, it's quite neutral and it might potentially help ameliorate a bit of the ocean acidification that is so incredibly detrimental to shellfish seed. So essentially like the little shellfish larvae and crab larvae and other bivalves. And so those are a couple of examples of how this technology that's been around for thousands of years, all up and down the coast, is also a modern day climate adaptation and is really focused on the tribe's knowledge, the fact that it is a community. A clam garden is something that it's a garden, it needs to be tended. Like the elders will tell you that in order for the clam garden to be successful, everyone has to be there and tending the clams. And so everyone has a role. The elders are there, they're telling stories. The kids are running around on the beach learning from older folks. They're there, you're fluffing the clam garden. If you want to know what fluffing is, you can ask me later. There's all kinds of things, taking the seaweed, bringing it upland to nourish the plants. There's a whole variety of upland plants that are connected to clam gardens. So you see more tiger lilies, you see more camas fields that are near clam gardens. We also think that potentially the clam garden wall, but also the species that habitat around the wall can help with storm surge, decreasing storm surge. So what we find is that we have something that really demonstrates what resilience means to the tribe, that is a community event that gets everyone out there, that doesn't fit the definition of what built infrastructure is in the Western point of view. But I think most, if not all of you, can clearly see that there are a lot of connections in terms of what resilience is and how it moves forward. And one of the things that I think is really cool about it is that nothing is stagnant, right? The clam garden walls move, the beach moves, everything moves, and culture moves with it. Culture is not stagnant. Culture is something that adapts to changes. And so, you know, some of the elders say, we've been here since time immemorial, and we're going to be here going forward. And the way that you do that is through change. And so while your knowledge continues to be passed down, that doesn't mean that it's stagnant. And so I think it's important to think about resilience in that way as well, as that there has to be flexibility in there too. And I think the clam garden wall is an excellent example of that. I'm going to leave it there. I'm happy to answer lots of questions about the clam garden wall or point you to people that know more about it than I do. And also, I would love for folks to raise their hand or unmute or chime in at all about some of the other projects that they know of that are going on, and also about your definitions of resilience. Y'all are a quiet bunch. How many people have been to a clam garden? Raise their hands. I can't see you all, so I'm guessing, let's see, at least a couple, hopefully. I see someone clapping. That's awesome.
Thank you,
Cassidy?
Jamie. I have not been to a clam garden, but we do have a question, some questions rolling in here. Amelia asks, "What is clam garden fluffing?"
Really, I knew you'd ask me that. Yes. Um, so fluffing is when you take a pitchfork and you're actually aerating the sand and the soil that the clams are living in. So we call it fluffing. The kids love it. They just like roll on the ground laughing. Um, but it's also a lot of work because you want to get more air, so there's more pour water in there and keep the clams happy. Yeah, so they don't get compacted. Laughing, fluffing the beach.
That sounds like a nice activity on a day like today when it's so sunny.
Sadly, we don't have a negative low tide today.
Mm.
That's in daylight.
Projects.
Jennifer, did you unmute?
I think I did. I didn't mean to, but I have never been to a clam garden, and I'm like visioning what it feels like and in the experience just based on your description of it. So thank you.
I feel like I should find you all a picture. Would you like to see a photo? A couple photos?
Yes, I would like to smell it too, but I don't know if you can share that over the Zoom. But if you can, you're magic.
I don't have that kind of magic, but I can definitely get you some pictures. Let's see. In the meantime, is anybody else working on some projects that are based on Indigenous or other views of resiliency? I'd love to hear about them. Let's see. Oh, cute. Okay, I got some photos for you. Can everyone see this?
Yep.
Awesome. So this is actually during the clam garden build. These are two Swinomish youth who are quite strong, I might say. And this is on Kikit Island, Kukatali. This is the beach looking south. So if you know Swinomish at all, what you can see is Skagit Island on the right and Hope Island on the left. And let me see if I can get you a couple of other views. This is the build. This is the introduction when we actually talk to the youth about what's going on before we bring them down there. Some clams. I haven't looked at these pictures yet. I'm just scrolling through my clam garden pictures. Roasting oysters on the beach at night during a nighttime dig. We had a nighttime dig in February because that's when there are low tides. Is 10 o'clock at night. So that was we fluffed the beach at night. It's lovely. Here's a circle up around the fire. This was just last month. There's the sign for it. I'm gonna see if it stop sharing for a second, find one other picture for you all.
Jamie, while we look, we have some more questions coming in from
Yeah, please.
Olivia. Olivia, do you mind coming off mute here and asking in person? I can also read it out for your question as well.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. I'm just getting some lunch in, so apologies for
Sorry about
being
that.
muted. No, you're good. Yeah, thank you so much, Jamie. So I've been in conversations with colleagues both at Ecology and other state agencies who have expressed interest, been really inspired by the Swinomish Clam Garden effort, and interested in supporting, you know, more of that type of work, and particularly specifically with clam gardens. So my understanding is that this work should be led by Indigenous communities. Do you have recommendations for the best way for non-tribal entities to do that outreach and to start building partnerships to support clam garden efforts?
I could give some recommendations. I think there are a few other people on this call that also have probably some good recommendations. Amelia, I'm looking at you. But yes, I think there's a couple of ways to do it. One, of course, and we all know this, and I know it takes a lot of time, is just to establish relationships, right? Like it takes time, but go to the communities and sit down and don't say anything. Just listen. It's an art, right? Just hear what folks want to have supported, because maybe they don't want to build a clam garden. Maybe they want to do something else. But being there to listen, but also to be really clear about how you can and cannot help. And I think one of the best ways to help at this point, which is happening right now, is a lot of agencies are providing funding opportunities. Like, for instance, with the HEAL Act, just saying, here's funding for tribes. You tell us what you want to do with it. Be as least prescriptive as possible, and let the tribes lead, and then say, do you need technical assistance? If so, what would you like us to do? And I think being really clear at the onset about who owns the data, what happens to the data, is key. And I know with a lot of state agencies and federal agencies, this can get tricky, but I can tell you that we have worked with both, as well as academics, and signed data sharing and ownership agreements that essentially says, yes, we would like your expertise. No, you cannot take this data away, or use it or publish it or share it in any way unless we approve it first. And I think that there's an understanding that this is key in terms of relationship building. Does that
That's
help
great.
answer
Thank
your
you.
question?
Yeah, thanks so much.
Amelia, do you have anything else to share?
Well, it's hard to improve on anything that you say or do, Jamie, but I appreciate it. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Amelia Marchand. I work with the affiliated tribes of Northwest Indians and the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center as the Senior Tribal Climate Resilience Liaison. And one of the things that I guess the big question that comes through a lot is exactly that same question. And I feel like there maybe needs to be a whole webinar series that we create on trying to just answer that question. Because I was actually presenting in a class at UW yesterday that addressed some of those same issues, and understanding that it takes time to build relationships of trust is the first thing I feel, which is just a different version of what Jamie said. But there's definitely a lot to be said in being humble, honoring who you are and who the community is, or the individuals that you're meeting with. And being able to grow the relationship slowly through trust, I think is really important. And without going too much further afield, in the chat, I'm going to put a link. I'd love for folks to join us at the 2024 National Tribal Leaders Climate Summit. It is now almost a month away. That's crazy. It's going to be in Auburn at the Muckleshoot Casino Resort. And my friend and colleague Kylie is also on this call. We are on the planning team for this event, and we really work hard to elevate tribal priorities, tribal voices in the climate space. And it's open to anyone that is able to attend to learn, just to participate and learn. We're going to have multiple panel sessions, multiple keynote speakers, lightning talks, so many lightning talks, and then poster session as well. So that's one good way to get involved and meet some folks. And it's just around the corner. And take it away, Jamie.
I'm excited. I will definitely be there, because I actually really enjoy those conferences. I find it's the best place to create and maintain relationships, for sure. this is a picture, an aerial view of us building the clam garden. And when I say us, I just don't mean the Swinomish tribe. I mean, there are many tribes and First Nations all represented in this picture. So this is a gathering of relatives working together to create this wall. And this picture is probably taken at maybe like a -1.5 tide. So this particular clam garden wall is adjacent to a Washington State park. It's called Kukatali, and anybody is welcome to go to the park and check it out. Like I said, summertime is when you see the negative lows. And we have work events regularly, but it's a really beautiful thing to see, particularly when the kids are out there and working together to maintain this particular clam garden. And because it's so new right now, we're doing a lot of studies to see how it changes and how the terrace is created and how the populations of clams and other bivalves change and what other species show up. Does this mean we're going to see more bull kelp on the other side of the clam garden? We have divers that go down. Are they going to see more forage fish or octopus or so many other things? We have a camas bed that is just west of this area. Will there be an impact there? We're really curious to see what happens. So again, it's a mixture of thinking about Western science, for instance, using SETs to measure elevation change on the clam garden, and Indigenous science of having, for instance, Alana Quintasket, our vice chair, standing on this land and talking about how she feels her ancestors with her. And that in itself guides what she does. And that is also a science. And so I think that it's a great example, and Amelia mentioned this too, of just having respect for different ways of knowing, and knowing that when you can hold them, can't necessarily integrate them because they're two different knowledge sources. So oftentimes it's apples and oranges, but when you can hold them together and understand that they're both important, I think that it provides a lot of opportunities for moving forward, and really letting the tribes lead in these projects is key.
Jamie, we have another question in the comments here. I really, first of all, really appreciate that you can hold both those knowledge, maybe not necessarily integrating them, but holding both of them is extremely important. And Marianne in the comments here says, do the clam gardens help reduce erosion?
That's a good question. I'm guessing, do you mean like longshore transport or erosion, like little bit of a clarification? I'm not sure what kind of erosion you're speaking of, just in general of like from increased storm surge.
Yeah, I was picturing, hi, I love your talk. This is so awesome. Makes me so happy. But when you showed that picture of the clam wall, and I was just picturing like the tides coming in, and that the clam walls would kind of slow the force of the waves, and that it would affect the sediment. And I don't know, I was just kind of like thinking how would it affect everything? Yeah.
I think you're right on target. There's no peer-reviewed publications that demonstrate that, but it is our hypothesis, and they're working on it. Essentially, like I said, we do have some SCT monitors measuring elevation, but we're also doing just a lot of on-the-ground data of, what sort of sediments are there and how does a storm impact what we see on the clam garden, and are we seeing erosion? Are we seeing accretion? Are we seeing neither? But that is the prevailing theory, that the really low-lying walls help attenuate the wave action and helps support a bit of a protected area, for sure. Thanks for that question. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah,
President
Amelia, please, if you want to come off mute there.
Yeah, I have another question. I don't know how to lower my hand. So you spoke earlier about the different like meanings of resilience, and that the federal agencies or state agencies sometimes will only speak to resilience in terms of infrastructure, Western defined infrastructure. For this project, can you talk a little about how the cultural education process went to introduce them to other forms of structural resiliency? I guess I don't even know if that's the right term.
Them meaning the agencies, the outside agencies. Because it was a whole process, right? Like this is the traditional practice that hadn't been seen at Swinomish either for generations. And so there was also that process of reintroducing community by going to BC and being on those clam gardens, which was really cool. But what we've done a lot is invite people out and have them participate in work parties with us. And so they can feel it for themselves. And it is a feeling. It's not a thinking process. This is not a desktop exercise. So being out there and feeling the difference and understanding, I think, helps. But I'll be honest, I mean, we did a research project, I guess it was 2 or 3 years ago now, where a postdoc from UW interviewed several agency staff at the county, state, and federal levels. And what she found was that it wasn't that folks didn't get it. It's just that our laws and regulations are too slow to keep up. And so most staff understand, but it's hard. What she found was that it was really hard for them to push because they were coming up against, high level senior supervisors who didn't understand because they never went out in the field or made these connections, and that we don't have any policies or regulations that support this. And so thankfully, I know several of you who are actually working on this, calling you out, Evan, to make these changes, which I think is great. But I just say, keep bringing people out, keep showing them that it's there, and that there are so many definitions of resilience, as we saw just from those sticky notes, not just one. I mean, I think you all have worked with Indigenous communities, like vast majority of you know that each community has their own definition. And so I think even explaining that to folks is key who don't know, because they're just like, oh, well, there's the Western definition and then there's the Indigenous definition. And it's like, well, not exactly. Like everyone has their own version. But how can we create space in rules and regulations that are so very limiting? How can we create space for those multiple definitions, and then also funding sources to support the work? Whoever has an answer to that, let me know.
We have another question here from Connie. Did you need to get a hydraulic permit? And also, do you need to rebuild the structure periodically? Or I suppose, will you?
So we did go through the permitting process with the Army Corps of Engineers because it is on the near shore. And so you really do need to look at whether or not for the building process, whether there would be any impact to any listed species. We did it outside of the spawning window, outside of the forage fish window. So we were really careful about when we built the wall, and also how we built the wall. So we did roll rocks down from the upper part of the beach, which is traditionally what was done, but we also did purchase rocks from a local quarry and have a flat-bottomed quarry boat essentially come up as close to shore as they could and dump them right close to where we wanted them to be. So yeah, we did go through the permitting process. It did take like almost 2 years to get the permit. We also had to make sure that we weren't in any eelgrass areas. So there was issues there in terms of just ensuring that, we checked all of those boxes. There was certainly discussions from some tribal council members saying we're a sovereign nation, we can do what we want, we don't need to do this. And then the lawyers were like, well, let's play nice. And so we did go through the permitting process. But I do think also, in terms of rebuilding, it's not so much a rebuild as a maintenance. It's kind of like, to think of a Western analogy, when you build a fence, which is a very Western thing, a fence. When you build a fence, if you take care of it, then you don't have to rebuild it. Make sure that the posts are strong, they're not rotting. Maybe there's a huge storm and one or two of the rocks got moved, but we're out there at least 4 times a year in community work parties where, we get 50, 60 people on the beach. So if there's a rock that's rolled off, we can put it back, or and it's not a contiguous wall either. Sometimes, depending on how the beach is shaped, and you see this in BC, sometimes you need to have what's called like a canoe passage, which can be anywhere from like a foot to several feet of break in the wall, particularly if there are streams that are coming out through there. So you don't get like a lot of backflow of fresh water. It's fascinating to look at. Once you get into it, there's a website called the Clam Garden Network. And if you jump on that, it's based in BC. There are clam gardens all up and down the coast that are shown on this network, and a lot of First Nations doing some incredible work. And you can see that each clam garden is unique and they're beautiful. They're absolutely gorgeous. I hope I've all inspired you to go see a clam garden. I mean, that said, we're focusing on clam gardens, but there are so many other activities, right, that tribes are doing. For instance, we're collaborating with some tribes a little further south that are bringing back good fire to the land. And that is such another incredible example of resilience. I mean, here's a knowledge source also that's been around for countless generations about how to take care of the land and the forests, and how to do it in a good way that also increases everything that's important to those particular communities in terms of passing on knowledge and community connection and cohesion, food sovereignty, food security, all in the way that they maintain fires, and also help with ensuring that we don't have mega fires. Henry?
Thank you. Yeah, I have a comment that I think is a question as well. And it's about sort of, pushing against agencies, taking FEMA as an example, to consider broader definitions of resilience. And one thing, a lot of my work has kind of been centered on resilience to coastal hazards, but how you can't be resilient to coastal hazards without thinking about and incorporating benefits for so many other aspects of communities and habitats. And there is no definition that's common for resilience, but I have seen kind of similarities in processes that can create resilience, such as, really focusing on partnership and collaboration and things like that. And I'm curious if you see like culture and collaboration and outcomes, kind of tangible outcomes from the process of building and maintaining this clam garden that can like translate over to if you're trying to get a more infrastructure, like you're trying to do something for FEMA's purposes, it's going to set you up for FEMA funding for whatever. Is there a carryover if they don't, like, are there other outcomes that carry over into some of the other Western like spaces that you're kind of forced to work within sometimes? I feel like that's not a very good question, but
I think I understand what you're saying.
what do you see as the other outcomes that you can try to communicate to someone like FEMA of like, this does so much more than just what you see on the landscape, but also like for how the community responds as a resilient community?
I'm
I don't
thinking
know.
something that one of my teachers, an elder who recently walked on, used to say. He would say, you have to say it at least 20 times in 20 different ways, gently, for them to get it. And at the same time, it's a roadblock and you're going to figure out a way around it. And this is I'm for the latter half of that, there's always a way around it. And tribes are super creative at figuring out what that is. I can't go into more detail because I think the lawyers would get really mad at me. But it's the truth, right? Like, and again, I think it's the laws and the regulations themselves that are the real roadblocks, not necessarily the people. I think, most people are well-meaning and they get it to some degree. And if they don't, then again, you got to say it in 20 ways, 20 different ways. But it's really just like, if you've ever written a grant, I hate to say this, excuse my French, it is a creative art of bullshit. Like you just tell them what they need to hear and then you do the work you need to do. And they may not be exactly the same. I like the crying face. Thank you, Olivia.
I think that's exactly right. And my very bumbled question was kind of like I sometimes I try to play that role of connecting like the need on the ground to the requirements of a grant application, and like how do you write that bullshit in a way that gives you the flexibility to do what you need to do, right? So that's maybe where that question was coming from.
And yeah, and I mean, honestly, as non-Indigenous allies, honestly, it's our job sometimes just to take the fall, to be like, oops, my bad. And get the work done.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left here. Does anyone have any last minute questions for Jamie or for anyone else in the group here? I think also leaving off at the creative art of bullshitting is a great end note here. But any other last minute questions?
Jennifer, you're gonna put me on
yes.
the spot. It's funny because I don't have a set word definition. For me, it's really a feeling. And you get that feeling when you're in community. And yeah, each community clearly is different, but the feeling when you're in it. That's you're lifting each other up. That's resilience. You're stronger together. Yes. A community is more than just humans. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you all for engaging and spending your 50 minutes of lunchtime with me. I really appreciate it. Feel free to reach out to me if anybody has any follow-ups.